the fire is worked. I'm actually doing things to set up what the firing is going to give, not just accepting whatever the fire gives, and particularly when it's brilliant service from that makes it okay. I wanted there to be an understanding that a whole lot went on before that, and it really, in a way, I was about to say that it started with the gathering of materials, and it does in a lot of ways, particularly with the clay, but in other ways it starts with the remembrance of past fire. Then things are brought together in the creation of form to take advantage of what you know the fire can give.
This is where we part company. I mean, we both share certain processes. We both throw, I mean me, when I have to, slab build using mould work,
yes.
And I mean you stop short of slip casting, but you use slips,
yes.
Different form. So there's a parallel of process to where it departs, of course. I like to be able to stick something in a kiln, shut the door and forget about it and have it all work beautifully. You and your partner Peter get totally involved with the process. Now that's a hell of a lot of hard work. Okay, we've talked about the decoration of the flame, but what else is it about fire that so attracts you, that compels you so?
I think it's really that we sit here in this environment and look at nature, and the uniform surfaces that we look at are the surface that we as humans have created. We look at nature and we see a variegation of movement, whether it's these rocks that we're sitting on or the tree that's there. It changes. It'll have a weather side and a lee side. It changes with the seasons. And I think that's what wood firing helps get. It gets surfaces and colours that change, whether it be glazed surfaces or raw clay. I don't depend that much on really full raw clay surfaces. I use a lot of glazes, and I'm looking for that variation in them, that when the fly ash that comes with the firing falls on the glaze, that side of the piece is going to be changed. And to me, that gives a connection back to the environment that I live in. If I was living in the middle of New York or Sydney or wherever and it was industrial surfaces around me, then perhaps I wouldn't be working in the same way. I'd be wanting to reflect that. And especially too with making a lot of foliage vases, to use sort of seasonal things. It just seems right. The two seem to go together. Yeah. And I also like the way that they can work in modernist spaces, if you like. There's no way that these are for, sort of rustic, doily-clad surfaces. They are meant to sort of counterpoint strong architectural forms and spaces.
That's where I think is one of your strongest points. You have this innate architectural sense of space. I mean, it's evident here in the place that you've built for yourself in your workshop and in your house. And I think it was the height of that conscious manipulation of space was in Working Fire, the exhibition. And, you know, at the risk of sounding sort of really sort of poor, it was one of the best shows I ever saw. You know, and it still
take a risk.
Still resonates. It still resonates. You
Well,
know,
thank you.
because there was an orchestration there. It was choreographed in such a way, from the selection of the individuals, from the way you organise the space, from the way you sort of painted everything and the way you set everything up. There was a nice reaction between the three individuals, and I think what that did, and you read through the comments books,
Yeah.
you know, and people actually saw what you were on about, what that did was to create a better understanding of an integral whole aspect of the potting process and the firing technique. The choice of the three individuals, tell me, did you choose them specifically or because that was the only three wood firers in the state?
I think to a certain extent the latter is the case, but then if they weren't three good wood firers, and that's including myself, I wouldn't have done it. And I thought that there was an interesting span of approach, of technique, and in the end it was difficult because the participants were at pains to say, well, you know, okay, we're all wood firing, but we're using it in different ways. And in terms of making the Working Fire video, I came to the conclusion, well, the only one I could successfully represent was my own, or how Peter and I work here. The central thing that I suppose I was trying to get at was the fact that we are using this process to get the surfaces that you're seeing. And by seeing how one person surfaces were related to the whole process of gathering clay, preparing it, glazed materials, packing in particular, and firing, there could be a better appreciation of what went into producing the forms and surfaces of each one of us.
So do you think the video served the purpose then of helping the audience to understand the firing process, given the three very diverse artists' work?
I think what helped do that was actually the small bios that Glen did, because they enabled each person to have their say and to relate the work in the exhibition to what they said about was going into it. I think for me, Working Fire really did the job on my work and my process, and hopefully just open the door a bit more to the others and, you know, how they worked.
I have this problem, Ben. On the one hand, I see...
Which particular problem is this?
No, the one that I'm grappling with myself about fire, actually, because it's become something that's become interested in. So on the one hand, we've got what I would regard as the randomness of fire, and that you love in terms of the way you can't control exactly how the passages of the flames, etc., go. But on the other hand, you contrive to place things in such a way. I have problems reconciling that. I mean, do you see that as being too artificial? Do you see, do you not give enough leeway to your kiln? Have you become so tight-assed, I guess I'm saying? Are you trying to control things too much, I guess I'm saying?
No, because I don't think that you can fully control. And I think it's probably to the degree that you allow the randomness to happen. And I've put it in that writing that you're referring to, that results are framed, not ordained. And so when I put a piece down on its side on a wad, I'm conscious that I want that resist marking to be about in that area, but I can't know exactly what that's going to look like. And sometimes I've got marram grass that they're going on in wads and things like that, and I'm trying to look underneath and get it in roughly the right place. But, you know, I'm not certain. With this sort of work, there's a tremendous lot of judgment has to be used after the pieces come out from the kiln. Because
how do you mean, in terms of keeping it or discarding it?
In terms of whether it's worked or not. I mean, you know, in what I was just saying about, you know, wad marks on the pieces, you can have something that just doesn't work. You might have nice surfaces on the other side that's up, got charcoal and a very subtle area, but the resist part where you've put it on wads might just not have worked. Might have got it completely wrong. And often a lot of those pieces are faceted, and I'm working on the resists, sort of softening these sharp facets, and it doesn't always work. I mean, if it was that predictable, if I was able to get that degree of control, probably some of the interest would be lost. I may as well just be putting all over glaze in the gas kiln or the electric kiln. I'm actually losing the electric kiln now at times. So that's not what I'm after, and I'm not trying to control it, and I don't know they ever could to that degree.
Given that you can't control totally the intent, but you've had an idea of what you want, are you able to then look at that with a completely open mind and not be disappointed with something that you feel should have happened and hadn't? Can you accept the serendipitous, I suppose?
I think you know, we've taught together and been friends over a period of time, and I think it's like saying to students, when something comes out of the kiln that's different to what you anticipated, give it time, because it may actually be something that's better, more interesting, opens up other avenues than what you had in mind when you placed it in. So I think I'm probably more able to do that with the wood-fired work than with other, because if I'm putting it in a gas kiln, I'm expecting a certain result, and I'm expecting it to look the same all the way around. Here I'm knowing that there is going to be variation, and I've just got to take time, get it away from the rest of the work that's come out of the firing, give it some free air to be able to sort of have a look at it and think, oh well, you know, that's worked better.
That also reflects a lot of how we think about pottery in shoulders and necks and waists and bottoms and things like that. And your latest work doesn't have shoulders and bottoms and so much. It's very much more architecturally geared.
It is, and as you know, a lot of that came out of work that I did during the Masters when you were one of my supervisors. And it
Don't blame me.
Why not? That'd be a first if I couldn't. I think it's an interesting one, because yes, that has
quite
been
a transition,
quite a different direction, and sort of leaping ahead, it actually provided a few problems with me getting back on the wheel, because I'd managed to do work, and I've called it off-form work, because it's very much like the same sort of techniques that you'd use for concreting, with form work that something's poured against. In this case, the clay's sort of rammed against it and the form work then taken away. I suppose because I'd managed to make changes in the work there, I found it initially a little bit difficult to sort of get some of those changes there. The forms that are more the torso and trunk forms that I'm now doing sort of reflect that a bit more. They reflect me getting more comfortable and finding new directions with the work on the wheel as a result of doing that off-form work. And I mean, that very much came from going on the field trips round to the west coast, and initially those forms came from seeing that long angled slag heap in the middle of Queenstown. And
was that sort of the turning point?
Well, that was very much the impetus for it, and initially making a piece in concrete and wood.
Oh, that's
and
right.
If you remember, I brought it up to you, and I was a bit sort of, you know, disappointed by the fact that the concrete portion had broken. But you said, well, have a look at it. It's actually better that it's broken. Because of time pressures, I couldn't work with clay, and so I worked with other materials just for what happened in that summer school. I was really aware that I was going to an exotic place and going to the west coast, and everything is sort of bigger. You know, the people, the landscape, the devastation, the beauty. It just tends to be bigger around there, and I've actually written about it sort of being a cauldron for ideas, and a lot of it developed there, but I was conscious that I wanted to bring it back here. I don't live around in the West Coast, and that's for the people that live around there to find ways to express that place. This is where I live, and it's kind of to me it's an in-between space between an urban, as is yours really, between an urban environment and a mythic, illusionary wilderness. At the beginning at the art school at Mount Nelson, I became interested in raku firing, and from that what I got was the potential for just clay and the firing process to give colour and surface effects. I was frustrated by the fragility of that work and became aware of a high-fired alternative with wood firing. Gwyn Hanson-Piggott was then, almost at the time when she was leaving. I did a 2-day wood firing workshop with her, and that reinforced the interest in wood firing, but also in using local materials. Because much of what I do is built on that resource of knowledge that came from the testing that was undertaken in the short period that she was here. I use still some of that same suite of materials, some others that I've brought in, but it is very much based on that. And I like the idea of that sort of continuity of building in a different way on the same materials.
What surprised me at the time of your course was the outcomes, was the poetry. And in many ways it was sort of, I'm still reconciling that because I think that gradually the poetry and the work and the process is starting to actually come together a lot better than it did when it was still raw. So here on one hand you see the grimness of what we've done to a landscape, you know, whilst appreciating its natural beauty where you live. And yet you're writing this romantic poetry about this stuff.
They weren't poems initially. They were really just couplets, and they were trying to capture what I was seeing and feeling as tightly as possible, which ended up being poetic. And as part of the reading that I was doing, I came across a quote from Andy Goldsworthy, the British sculptor, and he was talking about the ephemeral work he does with stones on the beach and ice or throwing clay up in the air, and it was saying about it being a breathing in, and that his more permanent work, say the arches in stone, were the breathing out. And that resonated with me because I actually saw that what I was doing was finding a way to breathe in where I was and what I was seeing. On one hand, it can be viewed as romantic, going out and gathering materials. On the other, it can be viewed as taking some personal responsibility for that. When you buy a bag of clay wrapped in plastic, you don't actually ever get to see the big hole in the ground and how that affects the environment there. You don't get to see either that experience of what that clay looks like in situ, in place, and a whole lot of things that you can get from it.
The most ridiculous move I ever made as far as a profession was to come to Tasmania, where I don't think they'd ever heard of the word industry or design, come to that. And so it was a long and...
No, we dig it up and chop it down.
Yes.
Don't do things with it.
And so the whole idea of function and use came about slowly, And in terms of relation to ceramics, I mean, you know, when we first knew each other, we were so busy trying to make a carver career in our own little niche. And as you say, it's only been since we've come around. And I think you referred to family earlier, Ben, and I think family and food and those rituals associated with celebration and coming together, whether it's in mourning or whether it's in celebration, I think that's what's brought me around. I mean, you've always been interested though.
I have, but I think increasingly as we live in a world that's globalised and running at fast speed, the times when we get to pause and reflect are usually when we're sharing things. It's at that time that there's a chance for the objects that we use to be really part of those intimate shared conversations. It's also, for me, there's been a tendency to take pots that were born in usefulness, put them on a pedestal, whether it's in a museum or in a gallery, and see them in a different light. And what I like to talk about now is the creative potential of the user, of the people that purchases the work in their own space, whatever that is. They can appreciate it as an object in its own right, but then there's a whole other chance to experience it in use.
Yeah. Well, I recently, a month or so ago, had breakfast at Smalt.
Yeah.
And I had a couple of baked eggs in one of your things. And so there was a triple pleasure. A, in that I happened to know the guy that made the pots,
Yep.
and the food was good, and the presentation was fabulous, and it just enhanced the food, and there was this nice relationship between food and the ware within which it was served.
I think this is where a real Japanese influence does come in for me, of how good food isn't just on a blank canvas. It's about the integration of food and the vessels that are used, taken to a really high level in aesthetic and artistic terms. And I mean, we're not going to all do that. It just happens to be a society that does have the capacity, taking the ordinary, whether it be in flower arranging or tea drinking or in presentation of food, and actually picking the real guts of it out and aesthetically expanding it. There's no reason why we can't do that in our own daily life in simple and very sensitive ways.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Penny.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming down and doing that. That's
great.
really appreciated.
That's all right. It's been a pleasure.
Good one.
Well done.
Whew,
Thanks, Glen.
I'm exhausted.